All right, guys, how's it going? This is the Flow with the Go podcast, episode one, uh, test episode one, actually. For this video, I'm just gonna, go over a couple of different ideas, lay out the concept, the foundation for this podcast, what it's gonna be about, and basically, this podcast is gonna be about, the variety of different techniques and interests that I've learned over the years, a bunch of different, really far out, heavy concepts that are not, you very available to the mass consumption. I feel like I've been in a journey of like discovering, learning a lot of very different, uh, what you would call them, research. I would call it alternative research. Essentially, is what this podcast will be about, but also be is also about self development. It's about just learning, the nature of the mind and how to control your own thoughts, words, actions, and how to become truly free. That's always been my journey in life, is like understanding, the nature of the mind and also, what it means to be a free person, a free human being. Because, just giving a little bit of background about me, I was born in Mexico, and I came to the United States when I was 3 years old. My parents were undocumented migrants, and they had to do what they had to do to what they felt they had to do to survive and to provide a future for their children. Um, and what that caused for me is just a lot of growing up. I was always like I was very keenly aware that I was very different from most kids, or a lot of kids around me. At least I thought I was. And it was always kind of grew up in an environment where it was basically you were constantly paranoid of the fact that I was like aware of the fact that at any moment my parents could be taken from me. When I was 6 or 7 years old, my mom said, "Is like if we don't come back, take your sister and go to the neighbor's house to hide there." And it was very heavy subject. And and I had a lot of family members that also migrated illegally to this country, and they also I was part of seeing their experience. I would be the kid that had to translate for family members, and what they put me in a situation one time where I was basically they were caught, they were discovered by medical doctors, and the officials at the hospital were trying to get me to essentially rat out my family members. So it was like I was like maybe 8 or 9 years old. So it was a really intense situation. And so basically, growing up, it was very paranoid, and I had like this notion. It was basically like this invisible construct, this invisible prison created around me. This perception that I just did not have access to the same opportunities that other people did, and in reality, I didn't. I couldn't. Get a driver's license or get a legal paying job. Uh, Now, I mean, now it come to the point where I have fixed my citizenship status, my legal status rather. Sorry, meant to see legal status, and everything's working well now. But it took a long time, and it took a long time to really come to terms with understanding how that affected my perception. Um, you know, it was in my experience as an undocumented person in this country. Also, was coincided with a lot of very negative conditioning as a kid, a lot of abuse, suffered a lot of trauma before I was even conscious. So all of these things in conjunction just created like this very limited. My perception of self belief and self esteem was very limited, and I just felt like I did not have the same opportunities as others, and I was just destined to kind of go down a preset route of just being some kind of like just a manual worker for hire, and things like that. It was trippy growing up, and the whole point of me telling you the story is that like it created, my outlets for expression were very limited. I just, I still did, I still had a relatively normal childhood, but it created like a very, you know, just basically I was depressed, severely depressed as a kid, even though I had kind of relatively normal upbringing. Still went to school, still, got good grades, and still competed in some sport, in soccer, did some sports, did have some regular, no, regular childhood. But the thing is, it did, really fuck with my confidence. It did really fuck with, my sense of self-esteem, because essentially, you're limited because you don't have the same things, and these things that occurred to you before you were even conscious, all these traumatic events, before you were conscious and after you were conscious, as you were growing up, just kind of like, just really, created a very, like constantly just hitting on that sore spot, that area of self-esteem, just constantly beating me down, it felt like. And so I was kind of left to my own devices. I was I'm naturally, a pretty, introverted person, but this was, caused me to just magnify it times 10, times 100. So I was always like the loner kid, always depressed, couldn't really make friends, got bullied and all that stuff. So, and, it took me a long time to get over it. And the way I got over it was by diving into knowledge and diving into books. And I basically, raised myself on the internet. I just kind of, over the years, just looking for information, and I had this sense of this yearning to explore and to grow and to become better. But I still had that limited perception of, oh, I can't do this. So how am I going to do it? I'm just going to go on the internet and look up information that I like, or information that fascinates me, or information that like really, got my mind racing. And one of the earliest influences, or a lot of influences really, but a lot of influences early on in my life, in my early teens, and around the ages of 9, 10, was music, was always an outlet. And one of the cool things that really saved me was discovering my dad, back in the mid 90s, early 90s, they had like the CD catalogs, right? You could order, tons of CDs for just a couple bucks, for like, they were sold for pennies, and you just got a bunch of CDs in the mail. So what my dad did was he ordered a bunch of them, and I don't think he even listened to most of them or any of them, but he just had a bunch of CDs. And I would, and I was lucky enough to get in there and just discover a wide variety of music. So from there, it was already like, wow, like music was part of my outlet. And so I was like listening to a variety of things, for a kid, that was pretty, variety. There was a lot of variety. I had one of my first albums were like some of the Beatles albums, Sgt. Pepper, Help, I think, was one of the other albums. CCR, I got into CCR as a kid. I had a U2 Achtung Baby. I had Lenny Kravitz. I liked Lenny Kravitz for some reason. And then I grew up with also listening to Mexican music. So a lot of, norteños and cumbias and ballads, like romance songs and things like that. So I had a really cool, eclectic, exposure to music and culture at a young age. So my mind was already kind of expanding. It was already, my depth, my perception was already, flowering out. It was growing at, I would say, at a slightly, well, maybe not slightly, but just a faster rate than most other kids around me. So at least I had that going for me, but the one, the music that really resonated with me and what really got me going was metal music. Metal music it just spoke to my soul. Maybe in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have listened to. It's probably better off not listening to some of that, because it was a lot of it, was really kind of negative. If you're not in the right place, in the right mindset to perceive this music, to listen to this music. I mean, it might influence you negatively, which it kind of did to me. But at the same time, it stuck with me. Metal was my kind of like this musical outlet. My first metal album was Nativity in Black, tribute to Black Sabbath, and I like literally get scared. I'd be afraid sometimes to listen to it because I was like, oh man, this music is it's the devil, it's el diablo. I was like, yeah, it was, but I was fascinated and I was drawn to it, and I listened to metal. And continuing from there, the metal music kind of like gave me this thing that I could hold on to. So going into like early teens, into graduation, I'm sorry, not graduation. I mean, going into the early high school, 8th and 9th grade is when I discovered like bands like Rage Against the Machine and Tool, and that was like huge for me because it was like this. It spoke on I related to Rage Against the Machine for the political activism, the subject matter of the music. I think the first Rage Against the Machine album I listened to was their first one. They're self-titled, and that music was like, it spoke to me because it just said, like know your enemy, take the power back. All that music, and I listened to the lyrics and I was like, wow, this is my shit. This is speaking to me. And I listened to Tool. Some early Tool stuff was like, I listened to Undertow by Tool. That was also kind of like, now in retrospect, I don't really listen to Undertow that much. I don't really like it that much anymore. Still, I mean, I guess still good, but I don't really vibe with it because it's not really the subject matter, the contents of of Maynard's lyrics at the time. Or it's like imagine the lyrics from Sober. They're kind of like not really positive and reaffirming. So I don't really listen to it now. But at the time, that was my shit. Listening to Tool, Rage Against the Machine, even like Korn and Limp Bizkit. But going from 8th grade into 9th grade, this music, was what basically all I had. It was like the only shit that I had that made me like, gave me something that I could feel. And it was the time when the internet started, really speeding up the development of the internet, and that's when I got into it. And I started just living on the internet, not being sociable, not having it really. I had friends, but it was still very much like an outcast type of friendships that I had. So I was just living. I grew up, like I said, I raised myself on the internet, and. I was like in the early days, you still had MIRC, Merc. I had a friend that was like really into like computers, and I just go with him and I just learn about all this kind of shit, and just discovered like the seedy side of the internet. And I just 12, 13-year-olds just doing stupid shit on there, and so all this like in many ways, yeah, it did warp my mind. It did affect me negatively. But on the flip side, on the positive side, I was still curious, and I was exposing myself to a lot of just wide variety of information, And when I came across, around 2000, it was a year of the election, the George Bush and Al Gore election, and listening to Rage Against the Machine there, and on MTV they were playing, they were showing their music videos, and one of the videos that really stuck with me was a video for Testify, and that they're talking about basically both sides of the politics are the same. Both political parties are two sides of the same shit. It's like there's basically no difference, and that's true. They're the same thing. It's the two sides of the same coin, the double-headed eagle kind of thing. And so I just kind of became really politically and socially aware around that time. And another person that really influenced me was Bill Hicks, and how I got into Bill Hicks was through Tool, and also George Carlin, just from watching HBO. At the time, they would show us some George Carlin comedy. If I recall correctly, it was George Carlin that I discovered through HBO. I could be wrong. And so, basically, I just grew in this awareness, social awareness, and me being already kind of like an outcast, already being very much distrusting of authority, basically, just being left to my own thoughts, I could, internalize my own dialogue, and just started kind of going back and forth with ideas, just balancing back and forth, being very perceptive and very aware. And what, going from there, like I was saying, 2000s and up until 9/11, and that was the event. Everybody knows where they were if you're old enough. I was going into school, and I looked up, walking into the library before class started. I looked up, and the TV showed the towers and everything. And at the time I was still not very mature enough to really understand, but what I saw was how the people in my community, reacted to this event. Like there was like the lines of cars waiting to get gasoline on the day, or like right after the attacks. There was like for blocks and blocks and blocks. There was already like lines of people waiting to get gasoline. They thought, oh, we're gonna run out of gas. Saddam Hussein, this and that, Iraq or whatever. And so I was like, whoa, look how easily people just are like, I say, panic is the word. I thought, man, these people are they just buy anything. I don't know. I'm trying to explain my reasoning, but to me, it just seems like, wow, people are basically sheep. That's when I realized, like, most of society is a bunch of sheep. Individuals that don't really think for themselves. And so this motor started turning, this internalized, like, wow, I'm really thinking for myself, because at the time I was already like, really into George Carlin, Bill Hicks, Rage Against the Machine, Tool, these bands that kind of like really talked on the issues that that I was aware of. Like, I'd go up on the forums, and I'd like learn about the subject matters that they were discussing. And through Tool, I learned about Carl Jung, and Carl Jung was I immediately vibed with his analytical theories, I guess I would call him, his psychological analysis of things. And I was like, still didn't really understand it heavy enough. I didn't really understand subconscious, collective consciousness. I kind of like got somewhat of a gist, but I was always very perceptive. I was keenly perceptive. I was always trying to be like, let's get deep. What's this really mean? I really want to come to understand how all of this is just fits together. It was like solving a big puzzle. And that's what I did, and still growing. I lived on the internet. I lived looking into, all these things. And I got exposed to conspiracy theory at an age when most kids are out there trying to they're doing their schoolwork, they're trying to build their social lives, they have all the things. I was very much a loner. I was very much isolated, didn't really go out much, so I was just like knowledge, just feed me information, and I'll just try to like connect the dots, and I'll try to fit pieces together. And I would come across conspiratorial subject matters, and I didn't really get it at the time. I was like, well, okay, this is interesting. Well, okay, cool. Oh, Masons, what the fuck are what? I was not mature enough, but I thought it was. I was like reading Karl Marx and Che Guevara. I was like, yeah, the revolution, people, yeah, man, let's do this. But no, it's how do you say? It was just like stuff that was already pre-fed to me. It was just fed to me from. If you can pick up a Karl Marx book at your local library, chances are you're not digging deep enough. There's good information at the libraries, but there's a lot of it's like kind of like very surface level. You probably have to dig a little deeper to get to the real good shit. And so time goes on through high school. Still the super depressed loner kid. Very few friends, no real social life. Couldn't really vibe with girls, even though I I was unnatural, so to speak, deep down inside, but I was still like I had too much blockages, too much these things that prevented me from being able to meet women and meet teenage girls at the time, and date and stuff like that. And I didn't have any confidence, so I couldn't really put myself out there. But I was still growing, and so now I get to a certain age where you go out into the world. This was for me was college, and it was bad because that's when I started getting into drinking. I started being like being aware that like I still like a lot of people already by that age are like they kind of have momentum in their social aspect, their social lives, or their social ambitions, or their I don't know. To me, it seemed from my perspective, it seemed like people were more together, and they could like they had like more knowledge, awareness within the social group, and they could move within it a lot better than I could. I was still like a weirdo kid by myself, still didn't know what was wrong with me, but the great thing though is I'm still digging for like this self-knowledge. I was like expressing like what is this inside me that's like not that's keeping me from moving forward. Why can't I make connections with people? Why can't I create relationships? All my friendships were just like I couldn't really maintain because I just had no social acuity, I guess you could call it. But as I was developing though, but I still had my passions, which was at this time I was like really into film. I thought I wanted to be a filmmaker at the time, and but the reality is I didn't have like the social awareness to be like, oh, I'm just gonna get a bunch of friends, we're gonna make movies together. And I was like, I couldn't even make friends. And the friends I had, they already kind of like in their own clique, and so I was kind of like the friend on the perimeter of the social group. So I couldn't really like gather people together to be like, oh, let's do this and that. But I was like really into analyzing film and analyzing filmmaking techniques, film theory. Really got into film theory. Got into like the well in high school really Tarantino was inspired me. He was like, oh my God, Tarantino's God. He's amazing film director, and I loved his movies, and I saw it, and I would watch his commentaries and read up on him and his influences, and he would start referencing all these different genres of music. Of movies, and I would just dive in. Like, so I got into like French New Wave when I was 16, 17. I got in, I started learning about spaghetti westerns, European westerns taking place in America, directed by Europeans, and movies like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Sergio Leone, some of these obscure movies. Once Upon a Time in the West, and got into Stanley Kubrick, got into Sam Peckinpah. Sam Peckinpah, not too many people know who he is, and got into his movies. So I was just like taking in film and analyzing film and analyzing symbolism in film. To me, symbolism, in conjunction with what I had already learned about Carl Jung and psychoanalysis. So this was just like a continuation of that, of what I was trying to understand. Like, what is this whole fucking thing that I'm experiencing? Why? What is this? What is this existence? What are the images that I'm being fed? What are the patterns? I just wanted to see an overlying pattern because I needed a fucking map to understand what the fuck I felt inside that I couldn't quite get a grip on. And what I felt inside was just trying to find like a wholeness, a completeness. And which was what I felt was lacking. So it was a pretty like very not very graceful evolution. There was a lot of fuck ups, drinking, a lot of mistakes, couldn't really make friends, but I was still growing inside it internally. I was still becoming more aware of connecting the dots of what the fuck was in me and how it related to my outside world. So, I was connecting my limited knowledge of Carl Jung and kind of like connecting the images with film theory. I was fascinated with film, so I was going into like old communist era Russian communist films, like Sergei Eisenstein, and I was like fascinated. It was like, oh man, this guy's the shit. How he's like, how you montage theory, how you edit, and how you combine images, and how images are composed, and how they influence your mind, and how they influence your subconscious. And I was like, oh, subconscious, okay, cool, do, and from there, just things just slowly started kind of pulling together, and so I was learning about, Jung, film theory. And then I was also really into, in conjunction with the music that I was listening and the information I was exposing myself to. And little by little, it would always kind of lead back to subject matters and to studies that were conspiratorial in nature. It was me just trying to be, oh, film theory, subliminal messages. I was like, oh man, subliminal messages. I'm like, cool. This was like around 2007 when, like the Obama campaign started ramping up, and I would be like, oh, what is this? And I would always kind of stumble upon videos that were talking about, oh, the Illuminati exposed, like subliminal messages in music videos, subliminal messages in movies. And then that kind of like, it just kind of avalanched. It just went forward, and I was just fascinated. I became fascinated with this stuff. I discovered Alex Jones and around 2008, around the Obama era. It was like, oh, talking about, subject matters like the New World Order and all this kind of shit. And so I was like, whoa, was like, I was drawn. I was fascinated. Once I stumbled across this type of information, I didn't know what the fuck to make of it. So I was like, okay, I gotta know what the hell this is. This, I've already pursued this avenue of understanding, the nature of the mind, the nature of the psyche, Carl Jung, and understanding like archetypal mythology, and how, this is our psyche is kind of how our psyche is kind of built, how it kind of works, and learning about these concepts of the mind. So then I was putting that in conjunction with, okay, how you analyze images and how they affect your mind as well, and how you're influenced by media, essentially all kinds of media across the board, not just in movies, but also with advertising and things like that. So I was like, okay, so I was the patterns started fitting together for me. And then me being like, just this morbid curiosity, still having a lot of these issues deep down inside that I couldn't resolve. And I was like, okay, well, this conspiratorial, I like to call it alternative research. If you're not by now somewhat aware of, some deeper shit that is going on, yeah, I recommend that you start, just dive headfirst into this shit and see what the fuck comes up. Even if I know for a lot of people it's for a lot of people it's very unrealistic. It's very far out, and I'll tell you that it's on purpose. This kind of information is ridiculed. This kind of information is made fun of, and I agree. A lot of it is bullshit. A lot of it is hysterical. A lot of it is, probably not as truthful as as the intent behind it is. If you kind of understand the intent behind the person sending you this message, this kind of conspiratorial message, I guess you would say that the results of it are probably leads to more misinformation. So around 2008, Obama got elected, and I was already, by then I had already learned about, different, conspiratorial, still very surface level understanding of what conspiracy theory is. It was, or I would call it maybe conspiracy theorem, alternative research. And I was like just fascinated with like learning more and more about this kind of stuff, and learning about the occult. That's when I started learning, oh shit, when you get into like Alex Jones, he talks about the New World Order and all this kind of shit. I was like, okay, what the fuck is this? And then you heard about the Illuminati. I was like, whoa, what the fuck? That's like, to me, it was like, whoa, what the fuck? What kind of is this shit? You know, I was just immediately drawn and fascinated with this stuff. Yeah, so yeah, 2008, Obama, 2009, all of this started to just kind of like come together for me. Because, you know, if I understand, you know, the majority of people are basically, you know, unaware, unconscious, easily misled, and misinformed. The media, and I was already understanding the media, I was correlating the images that I was seeing and watching in movies and music videos. I was like, oh, okay, this is somehow being, you know, you're somehow, media is very powerful. The information that you're exposed to, you know, does, you know, have an effect on your consciousness. So I was like, and then, so individual consciousness, then and then it affects the collective consciousness, and then I started kind of like correlating and understanding the kind of like the patterns. I'm not quite sure exactly how to articulate what I'm trying to encapsulate, what I'm trying to share, but there's like a correlation between the images that you see in media, the information that you're presented as what is real, the history, you know, it's all controlled by, it's all by the public school system. You guys ever heard I think it's George Orwell, who controls the past now controls the future, who controls the present now controls the past. So if I might be misquoting it, but essentially it's like, well, who's controlling the information that you're being presented with? And I was like, oh, okay. So your past is, so the people that are the information, the way the information is being presented to you right now, you know, and if there's like an actual entities, conspiratorial in the sense that is dictating your past, the things that you learn about the past, therefore there must be some entities that are steering you in their version of the future. I hope, you know, I'll try to articulate it better and flesh out the words that I'm trying to say a lot better as I get better at presenting, better at presenting on this podcast. So now things started really gelling for me. I was like, whoa, okay, there's something going on here. You know, say what you want about Alex Jones and this type of information, this conspiracy stuff. You know, like I told you, some of it now, back then I was really vibing to it. Now I definitely see it from different eyes. But, you know, I was at that point where, okay, now I kind of see a bigger picture. I see patterns. I see how society moves, how, you know, individuals can be, I am manipulated. And yeah, and that's kind of how I'm going to leave it off for right now. I'm going to meditate on this and flesh out my thoughts a lot better for the next show, the next podcast, the Flow with the Go podcast. You know, this is a really useful tool for me to really get down to communicating a lot more concisely and communicating my ideas and creating, presenting it to you guys in a really good format. So, and hopefully you guys are following along and kind of vibe with me. You know, I've been in this shit. I've been learning about this stuff for the last 12 years almost, like basically my whole life. It's kind of been an accumulation of where I am now, to the point where I'm like, okay, I feel like I see such a big picture, and I have almost way too much fucking knowledge. And, you know, I want to, you know, just put my thoughts out there and hopefully show people that there's a way out. There's a way out, essentially. I feel like I've come across those kinds of answers, or at least to the best of my ability. And I just want to share and get feedback. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're crazy, motherfucker. True, I am, you know, I'm a little bit off my rocker a little bit, but, you know, I'm very much focused on, you know, getting to the deepest understanding of myself, who I am truly deep down inside, and where I fit in the greater context of the fucking cosmos. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, we're gonna continue on this subject matter, and I got, different. There's a million different ways to kind of address this issue, a million different ways that you can kind of approach it from health, from social political aspects, from financial and legal aspect. You can from like communication, subtle communication, your thought, your perception, control of perception, like learning about history, real fucking history. There's some really, what would you call it? History that is being occulted. Occult means hidden. Occultare simply means hidden. There's nothing like, evil or satanic or whatever, that kind of bullshit. There's nothing about it. It just means hidden. So there's a lot of information that's hidden. Thankfully, it's all coming to light. Many of you, I'm sure, are somewhat keenly aware of this this mass awakening that's kind of going on. And I'm just gonna throw my sense in, my 2 cents into this conversation. Hopefully, if you guys have any questions, if you have any feedback, if you want to know more, I'll talk. And you guys want to, just drop me a line, and we'll continue this conversation. All right, guys. Thank you very much. This was the first, I guess we'd call it test run. I don't know if it was a test. It was probably like the legit first show of the Flow with the Go podcast. Yeah, guys. Thank you very much for anyone who's still sticking around listening. This is a kind of a big deal for me to really finally get to share my true ideas with the world, and put it in a way that will make me kind of communicate more honestly, communicate a lot better, more succinctly. That's what the goal is, just to be the best version of myself. And yeah, thanks guys, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, peace.